In the late 90s, the Oakland Raiders had a running back, a speedster so fast, if you blinked, you probably missed him.
Kaufman down the sideline. Napoleon Kaufman.
This is speed. This is what you call speed.
His name was Napoleon, and he could defeat your defense on a single play. Football's version of a home run hitter.
Touchdown, Oakland. Woo! 80 yards in the opening play of the game.
And that is Napoleon Kaufman's forte. Give him a corner, give him an edge, color him gone.
He was so fast. I mean, he was so fast. If he got the edge, it was game over.
Trying to take down Napoleon Kaufman in the open field was a lot easier said than done.
His ability to slide off tacklers is uncanny.
The great individual effort there to get in the end zone had nothing to do with the blocking, had nothing to do with anybody else on that field, except for his ability to get smacked in the face, bounce it outside, and use great speed to get the end zone.
He made the defense look like they were moving in slow motion.
I mean, he just puts a move and this freezes Braxton, the safety, coming up to hit him.
He can dart, and he's got great vision. I mean, he sees things, and then he has some strength to finish off the run.
Napoleon Kaufman dominated the Pac-10 in the early 90s, establishing himself as an all-time great Washington Husky.
We have unofficially 221 yards for Napoleon.
The Huskies' all-time leader in rushing and all-purpose yards.
Napoleon was the guy who just set the standard for running backs at the University of Washington.
His NFL career got off to a slow start, but when the Oakland Raiders let him loose, it looked like they had found a star.
That's that bouncing, that's that instinct. And why did it take this guy so long to be a full-time running back, by the way?
But in the prime of his career, Kaufman was called away, choosing faith over football, leaving fans left to wonder what could have been.
I started realizing that there's more to life than just football.
Let's jog your memory. Born in Kansas City, but growing up in Lompoc, California, Napoleon Kaufman was an elite athlete from an early age. A track star and a football standout at Lompoc High, Kaufman reportedly ran a sub-10-second 100-meter sprint as a freshman, and that speed translated to the football field. Kaufman was one of the most coveted prospects in the state by his junior year. A home run hitter, Kaufman was a threat to score whenever he touched the ball, racking up over 2,100 yards on the ground with 39 total touchdowns as a junior. Then as a senior, even after missing 3 games with injury, he would still go for nearly 2,000 yards and 34 touchdowns. He led the Braves to a CIF championship and took home a plethora of awards. Colleges all over the country were calling. The Cali kid would be playing in the Pac-10, yet he wouldn't be staying in state, with Kaufman announcing his commitment to the University of Washington. Napoleon Kaufman was already drawing some high praise, with his agility, elusiveness, and rocket-powered speed. A big selling point for Kaufman coming to Washington was early playing time. He felt like he could get immediate touches for a national championship contender. Washington had won 10 games in 1990 and capped off their season with a Rose Bowl win. This year they were shooting even higher. On defense, Washington gave opponents nightmares, overwhelming teams with their purple storm. Then on offense, they had QB Mark Brunell, yet he would rarely see the field as he was coming back from a major knee injury. So instead, Billy Joe Hobart would be the team's signal caller. He had a dangerous target in receiver Mario Bailey, and although they had lost their top rusher to graduation, they were just fine with their 3-headed ground attack. Bino Bryant would lead the team, while Jay Barry would provide some power, leaving Kaufman to operate as the 3rd-string back. He showed massive upside in limited opportunity, and the expectations were growing. He likely wasn't getting the playing time he expected, but he was an important contributor on the ground, and would also act as a return ace, providing the Huskies with some unmatchable speed on special teams.
Coming in a freshman was my senior year. He was so fast, he was always tripping over his feet. Coach James wouldn't let him get spats anymore on his shoes. Couldn't tape his shoes because he's running out of his shoes. I had never seen anything like it.
Washington was rolling throughout the season. They were the highest scoring team in the nation while allowing the 2nd fewest points. They had just 1 game that wasn't decided by double digits, and it was still a win on the road over Cal. The regular season wrapped, and they were undefeated, ranked 2nd in the AP polls. Ideally, they would have taken on top-ranked Miami for the national championship, but they were contractually obligated to play the Big Ten champion in the Rose Bowl, so they got number 4 Michigan, and Kaufman set the tone from the opening kickoff.
Off to the 12. It is Kaufman. It is Kaufman within a step of going off.
It was a sign of things to come. Much like every other opponent they had faced, the Huskies ran through the Wolverines with little resistance. They capped off an undefeated season with a Rose Bowl victory and earned a share of the national championship alongside Miami, arguably the greatest season in Huskies history, with Kaufman wrapping his freshman year with 307 rush yards and 4 touchdowns, 39 receiving yards on 5 catches, and 185 total return yards. The Huskies were thinking dynasty going into the 92 season, bringing back most of their 91 core. The backs remained the same, but Kaufman had done a major leapfrog. Or maybe he had sprinted his way ahead of the pack, reportedly consistently clocking a 4.2 40-yard dash, and the sophomore would use that speed to run away from would-be tacklers all season. In a season-opening win against Arizona State, Kaufman racked up 133 first-half rushing yards. He only needed 2 carries to do so. 2 weeks later, he helped the Huskies take down number 12 ranked Nebraska in the first ever night game at Husky Stadium. After 4 games, Kaufman was leading the team in rushing, but had yet to start. With both Bryant and Barry slowed down by injury, Kaufman was the lead back going into a matchup with Cal. And how did he fare? He had the best single game rushing performance by a Husky in nearly 20 years, 208 yards on a punishing 30 carries. Everyone knew Napoleon could run. Now they were seeing that he could handle a lead back load, and he was still their most dangerous return man. Head coach Don James didn't need to see any more. It was now the Kaufman era in Seattle. Washington wasn't as dominant as last year, but they were still firmly in the race for number 1, until they went to Tucson to take on the Wildcats. Arizona held them to a field goal to hand the Huskies their first loss in nearly 2 years. Then, against a Drew Bledsoe-led Washington State team in the season finale, Kaufman would become the first sophomore to rush for 1,000 yards in program history. However, Washington was handed their second loss in 3 weeks. A 9-2 season was impressive, but their national champion hopes had disappeared. Yet they were again the best team in the conference. So it was back to the Rose Bowl and a rematch with Michigan, led by their first team All Pac-10 back, averaging a conference-leading 6.5 yards per carry. But this year, Michigan was ready. They completely contained Kaufman, holding him to 39 yards rushing on less than 2 yards per carry. And most critical was Kaufman's third quarter fumble in the red zone. It was the game's only turnover, and led to Michigan tying the score. Then with Michigan scoring the only points in the fourth, they got their revenge for last year. Washington missed out on a 3rd straight Rose Bowl, and Kaufman ended his sophomore campaign with 1,045 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground, 13 catches for 47 yards through the air, and over 360 return yards. Going into 93, Washington had lost a lot more talent on both sides of the ball. Brunell and Hobart were gone, as was Jay Barry. They were no longer national championship favorites, but they still had the talent to compete. Yet they soon found out it wouldn't even matter.
We believe that the penalties leveled against this program are too harsh, unwarranted, based upon this case.
What began as an isolated incident, with Hobart accepting an unauthorized loan from a booster, concluded in late June after an 8-month investigation on the Huskies football program. In the end, Washington was found to be in violation of many NCAA rules. The university would admit to some, but not all. However, it was confirmed that coaches were unaware and uninvolved in any of said violations. The NCAA still handed down the harshest of punishments, leading many, including Kaufman, to realize that they'd only be playing for pride for the remainder of their Huskies career.
The Husky football program is placed on probation for 2 years, given a 2-year ban on postseason bowl game appearances, stripped of 10 scholarships to incoming players each of the next 2 years. Paid recruiting visits reduced in half the first year, by 40% the next. And the conference will take the Huskies' television appearance money in 1993.
Almost immediately afterwards, Don James dropped a bombshell in the form of a written press release. After 18 seasons at the helm, the Dog Father was abruptly retiring.
I have decided that I can no longer coach a conference that treats its members, its coaches, and their players so unfairly. Therefore, effective immediately, I am retiring as the head football coach of the Washington Huskies.
So in a way, the Huskies were starting over. Replacing James would be longtime assistant Jim Lambright, so it would be a much different feeling going into '93, but at least the players had rapport with their new head coach. Napoleon Kaufman put the team on his back in the first game of the Lambright era. Taking on a number 15 ranked Stanford team, Kaufman rushed for 195 yards and only played 3.5 quarters in a convincing win. A bit of payback for some comments Stanford head coach Bill Walsh had made about the program during the probe. The very next week, Washington suffered their first defeat. The games were closer, and the losses were more frequent. These weren't the Huskies of old. However, they were still dangerous, with the majority of their offense coming courtesy of number 8.
Drops it off to Kaufman on the screen. Got around Walton. And they'll give it to Kaufman. Left side, it's a foot race.
Kaufman pops it. Gets to the right side. Scott blocking. Janoski in front of him. Can he get to the corner? Touchdown, Washington.
Kaufman was a starter from the beginning. He came up 1 yard short of 1,300 on the ground, but 1,299 would still lead the conference. 14 rushing touchdowns would also be tops in the Pac-10, and with 5.7 yards per carry, Kaufman got his yards in chunks. As expected, he was a burner, but he also showed he could get the tough yards, an ability to break tackles as well as make guys miss. You may not expect that from a guy his size, but Kaufman was just different.
Napoleon Kaufman weighs 175 pounds and can bench press 385.
Kaufman landed another first-team All-Conference spot and was a third-team All-American. Washington had an impressive 4-1 start to the year, but a constantly growing injury report made things a lot harder come conference play. And since there would be no postseason, the Apple Cup versus Washington State became Washington's bowl game, and the Huskies wanted revenge for last year. Kaufman came into the game with history on the line, a chance to break Greg Lewis's single-season program rushing record. He was 161 yards away. He'd need to have a big day, and he would. Kaufman finished with 181 yards on the ground. The record was his.
Well, that's a lofty record to break, young man. Greg Lewis was about one of the finest guys I ever saw put on a Husky uniform.
And with his rushing and the Huskies' defense holding strong, Washington took home the Apple Cup, and Kaufman ended his junior year with 1,299 rush yards and 14 touchdowns, along with 22 receptions for 139 yards, and added over 400 yards on special teams. The season was over, but the focus remained on Kaufman. Would he make the jump to the pros or return for his senior year? Washington had already spent part of last season trying to convince their star to stay, but at the same time, why would he? It's not like he'd be competing for a championship. But Kaufman was thinking even bigger. He saw a long-term future in Seattle, somewhere to plant his roots, and in his words, he wanted to be an example, not a stereotype. So Nip was back for the '94 season. The Huskies' offense had a little more cohesiveness than last year. Junior QB Damon Heward was healthy. His backup from last year, Eric Bjornsson, became his #1 target. And Kaufman had some good blockers to run behind, which included tight ends Mark Bruner and Ernie Conwell. A season-opening loss to USC wasn't the start they wanted, but it set the stage for one of Kaufman's signature games as a Husky the following week.
Kaufman up the middle, slices to the right side.
He's got room. He's got
by Kaufman. Touchdown, Washington. Kaufman slicing.
Great move.
Look at the move. If that isn't a Heisman candidate, tell me what is and who is. Kaufman finishes with a career-high 211 yards on 32 carries.
Napoleon Kaufman did whatever he wanted against one of the nation's top defenses, embarrassing Ohio State by racking up a career-high and single-game program record 211 rush yards in a big Huskies win. The following game on the road, a 5th-ranked Miami team featuring the nation's top defense made sure Kaufman got nothing easy, but he still managed a hard-earned 80 yards and in doing so, became the Huskies' all-time leading rusher. And with a full team effort, Washington handed Miami their first home loss since 1985, breaking a 58-game winning streak. Against a much softer UCLA defense the following week, Kaufman did a bit more damage. A new career high of 227 rush yards powered the Huskies to an easy win. Washington would jump out to an impressive 5-1 start and top 10 national ranking as Kaufman continued his ground assault. His talent was undeniable, his speed was second to none, and he didn't mind some contact either. But the biggest positive may have been his attitude. He again knew there would be no postseason, yet he still played with so much passion. Anyone could tell that this was a kid who truly loved football. And as he would say, Saturdays at Husky Stadium were always the highlight of his week. However, over the remainder of the season, every game spent away from Husky Stadium ended in defeat, with Washington going just 2-3 over their final 5. But it wasn't because of Kaufman. The senior again led the conference in rushing with a new program record 1,390 yards. He was named Pac-10 Offensive Player of the Year and a second-team All-American. But his college career would end on a sour note. With Kaufman playing through a toe injury, the Huskies couldn't defend the Apple Cup, losing to Washington State in the season finale, as Kaufman ended his senior year with 1,390 rush yards and 9 touchdowns, 24 catches for 199 yards through the air, and another 236 yards on special teams. Kaufman definitely hadn't hurt his draft stock by returning to college. The on-field product spoke for itself. He had the physical gifts that you can't coach. Some felt his size might keep him out of the first round. So how far would he fall?
With the 18th selection in the first round, the Los Angeles Raiders select running back from the University of Washington, Napoleon Kaufman.
It was an interesting pick, but the general consensus among analysts was that this was a good pick.
Is he not? Napoleon Kaufman, productivity for a man his size and the heart. Very interesting pick for the Raiders. Now they've got a little back who's fast, who gives that offense just a little bit more versatility to take a little bit more of the pressure off of Jeff Hostetler. I think it's a good pick.
I think he'll be a Dave Meggett type of guy in that offense for him, so I really like this pick.
Well, I agree with you, Mike. I really felt in the weeks before this draft, Napoleon Kaufman was a forgotten guy, underrated by many people, see him as a very good pro.
And if anyone was going to draft a speedster, it was going to be Al Davis and the Raiders.
That's the thing when you think of the Raiders. You think of big linemen and you think of people who can just flat run.
So Kaufman was returning to California to begin his NFL career, playing for his favorite team, except now he'd be in the Bay Area, as the Raiders were set to make their return to Oakland in '95. The Raiders had been a good, but not great team since their 1983 Super Bowl victory. Along with the change in venue, they also made some personnel changes going into '95, bringing in a new head coach in Mike White. He inherited an offense headlined by perennial Pro Bowl receiver Tim Brown and quarterbacked by Super Bowl champion Jeff Hostetler. White would go with a 2 running back rotation, but instead of 1 speed and 1 power back, the Raiders doubled up on finesse. Kaufman played behind the 5th-year Harvey Williams, giving the Raiders a lot of speed and agility out of the backfield. As a rookie, Kaufman was both a return man and a runner, especially dangerous in the 4th quarter. When opposing defenses were tired, Kaufman's fresh legs were a valuable weapon. Kaufman found the end zone in the season opener. His best game came a few weeks later in a blowout of the Jets, when he went for 95 yards on just 13 carries. But overall, his rookie numbers would be pretty modest, oftentimes seeing large chunks of his total yardage coming on single runs. The Raiders, on the other hand, looked like an NFL power over the first half of the season, jumping out to a surprising 8-2 start. The playoffs seemed like a lock, but then injuries hit. Players dropped like flies, and the Raiders collapsed, losing their final 6 and missing the playoffs. As Kaufman's rookie year had seen him rush for 490 yards and 1 touchdown, catch 9 passes for 62 yards, and even add another touchdown off a kick return. So it was a dysfunctional end to what began as a promising season. Kaufman's usage had plummeted over the second half of the year. He wasn't nearing bust territory just yet, but some were labeling him the most disappointing rookie of 1995, at least from a fantasy perspective. Kaufman did his best to keep it professional, perform well, hope for an opportunity, and don't stir up any more controversy. That's all he could do. But drowning out his words were a sea of Raiders fans demanding more Napoleon Kaufman. The offense looked pretty similar in '96, which meant Kaufman was again playing behind Williams. And again, he wasn't getting too many touches, but his big playability had never been more evident. Week 2, he averaged over 8.5 yards a carry. Week 3 was over 7.5. Then week 4, 16.5 yards per carry, with Kaufman totaling a season-high 116 yards on just 7 attempts against San Diego. Kaufman knew he had to make every carry count.
Napoleon Kaufman told us yesterday, I don't get many carries, I don't get many chances. My job is to make something happen and try to make a play when I get my shot.
No one could really pinpoint why Mike White was being so stingy with Kaufman, and for whatever reason, the last thing White would do was give Napoleon his credit. He's only been placed in situations to succeed. He's so different from Williams that defenses can't adjust, and Kaufman was just too small to take a real beating. These were just a few of White's arguments. So his coach didn't see his value, but coaches outside of Oakland knew how special Napoleon was. Then Williams was sidelined for the next 3 weeks. This was Kaufman's chance. In his first game as a starter, he gained just 13 yards and injured his ankle. He was limited over the next 2 weeks. However, when Williams returned in week 8, Kaufman was made a starter again, and this time he actually got some touches. Over the remainder of the season, Kaufman averaged over 11 carries per game. Nothing crazy, but for Kaufman that was big volume compared to what he had been getting. During that stretch, he rushed for over 550 yards. For the season, he averaged a league-leading 5.8 yards per carry. Kaufman had the explosiveness, and with opportunity, he was showing he could handle a real workload. The Raiders weren't the two-faced team they were last year, instead spending all season fighting for a wildcard spot. But a Week 16 loss to Denver would guarantee another early vacation for the Raiders, as Kaufman wrapped up year 2 with 874 rush yards and 1 touchdown, along with 22 catches for 143 yards and 1 more touchdown, and over 500 yards on special teams. Napoleon Kaufman was one of the most valuable all-purpose players in the league, but he wanted to be a valuable running back, at the very least a starter. He proved more than capable in the second half of the season, and in 1997, he'd finally be let loose. Mike White hadn't been the answer, so he was replaced with Joe Bugle. Oakland also moved on from Hostetler and replaced him with Jeff George, who would have a career year in '97. He had 2 good receivers in the ever-reliable Tim Brown and burner James Jett. He had another burner in the backfield. Napoleon Kaufman in year 3 was finally a full-time starter. He started slow, but in week 3 he torched Atlanta for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns on just 10 carries. It was the first of 3 straight games with over 125 rush yards, but that was nothing compared to what Napoleon would do in week 8.
First down give to Napoleon Kaufman, who bursts free. He's got a blocker in front. Kaufman to the sideline. He's to the 20, and he's bumped out of bounds just short of the 10-yard line.
The undefeated Denver Broncos came to town to take on the 2-4 Raiders. It was supposed to be just another stepping stone for Denver, but Kaufman had other ideas. On the first play from scrimmage, he broke a 57-yarder. He kept gaining yards in chunks over the next 3 quarters. Early in the 4th, he got loose again.
Kaufman has it, and more! Napoleon Kaufman! Touchdown!
An 83-yard score that put the Raiders ahead for good. A career day for Napoleon. A Raiders franchise record 227 rush yards, and a major upset.
Shanahan and the Broncos, John Elway's valiant effort falls 3 points short on the day that Napoleon conquered Denver.
Kaufman was finally showing that he was a starting caliber NFL running back, and potentially a star. The only question was, why did it take so long?
And why did it take this guy so long to be a full-time running back, by the way?
Kaufman had breakaway speed, and sometimes showed the physicality to run between the tackles. On top of that, he had some of the most impressive vision in the league. For as fast as Kaufman was, It seemed like he processed the play in slow motion. Laying in wait behind his blockers, then darting through the right hole was a big ingredient in his rushing success. Chargers great Junior Seau would compare Kaufman to both one of the most elusive backs ever and one of the most powerful. Kaufman and the Raiders were riding high, but they'd immediately come crashing down. Overall, it was a career year for the back, his best rushing and receiving season, and his most touchdowns. And every time he got into the end zone, he hit the same celebration, ending with him pointing skyward. Napoleon's linemen opened the holes, but he was led by something else. Kaufman did have a couple more 100-yard games the rest of the way, but he also had a lot of games where he was a non-factor by the second half. The Raiders' defense was one of the worst in the league. Oakland was often playing from behind and would abandon the run early. They went 1-8 after the Broncos game. They ended the season at 4-12, their worst record since 1963. At least Kaufman was a bright spot, finishing with 1,294 rush yards and 6 touchdowns, along with 40 receptions for 403 yards and 2 more touchdowns. Kaufman had the best season of his career by far. On paper, it looked great, but he was one of the most big play-dependent backs in the NFL. A lot of his runs would be for 10 yards or more, but a lot would also gain no yards or go backwards. But he was a home run hitter who just rushed for nearly 1,300 yards, so his starting job wasn't in jeopardy. Bugle was out going into '98. In his place was a first-year head coach named Jon Gruden. Oakland had strengthened their defense with a Heisman Award winner, and Brown and Jett were still one of the top receiver tandems in the league, but they never knew who would be throwing it to them. With Oakland going through 3 QBs this year, Kaufman was stifled in week 1 on the road, but he kicked off the home opener with a bang.
Jon Gruden. Kaufman has a lot of room. Kaufman at the 10, and he is romping into the end zone. Touchdown, Oakland.
An 80-yard touchdown run on the first play from scrimmage. Napoleon's specialty. The Raiders got the win. It was one of 6 over their first 8 games. The playoffs were looking like a real possibility. Kaufman continued as a dangerous home run hitter. Gruden called him Nitro, and if he went over 100, the Raiders usually won. But throughout the second half of the year, Kaufman was having trouble even cracking 50, hampered by an early season ankle injury that just wouldn't heal. Finally, in week 13, he looked healthy. He went for a season-high 152 yards against Washington, averaging nearly 9 yards a carry, but the Raiders still lost. Then after 10 carries the following week, Kaufman's quest for another 1,000-yard season came to an end when a groin injury forced him out for the game and the rest of the season. And after a 6-2 start, the Raiders went 2-6 the rest of the way. An 8-8 record wouldn't be enough for the playoffs, as Kaufman's shortened season had ended with him rushing for 921 yards and 2 touchdowns, while hauling in 25 passes for 191 yards. Rumblings about Kaufman had began over the offseason. Would he be a member of the Raiders come opening day? However, it wasn't as much a concern of the Raiders moving on from him as it was Kaufman moving on from football. His growing faith had some speculating he was feeling a higher calling, but he eventually joined the team for voluntary workouts. Football was his job, and he was there to play. For now, Napoleon Kaufman was still a Raider. So Kaufman was in the silver and black, but his role was changing. Gruden knew how big of a threat he was in the open field, so he put him back on return duties for the first time in 3 years. And it was true that a lot of his value did come in his big playability. He wasn't the most consistent runner, to say the least. Gruden wanted a more predictable rushing attack, so after a poor showing on the ground in week 2, Kaufman lost his starting spot. And now it looked a lot more like his first years in the league, used more as a change of pace back, paired with the newly acquired Tyrone Wheatley, a bigger and more powerful runner. This was the rushing attack Gruden envisioned. Pound the ball with Wheatley, then bring in Kaufman and swing for the fences. And Oakland was getting results. For the first time in 3 years, Kaufman averaged over 5 yards per carry, an improved O-line, and the combo of Kaufman and Wheatley gave the Raiders one of the league's best rushing attacks. Oakland had found their duo of the future, and it seemed like Kaufman would be around for at least a little longer after agreeing to a 2-year extension late in the season. The Raiders had also found a new starting QB in Rich Gannon, who greatly improved their passing attack, so offense was no issue, but closing out games was. Oakland had 8 losses on the year. Every loss was by 7 points or less. A different bounce here, another stop there, could have been the difference on the season, but as it was, another 8-8 finish meant no playoffs. And Kaufman ended his year with 714 rush yards and 2 touchdowns, 18 catches for 181 yards and 1 more touchdown, and 831 kick return yards. Kaufman had his new deal, but his offseason was again spent away from the football field and instead in the church. Kaufman had become a minister, and his life path was quickly shifting in a different direction. But he was still a Raider and was expected to be a major piece of an Oakland team with high expectations going into 2000. The Raiders looked good, and the Raiders looked resilient to begin the year. A huge comeback win over the Colts in Week 2 showed that things would be different. Kaufman had averaged nearly 8.5 yards. The following week, he upped that to over 17 yards per carry, so effectiveness wasn't a concern, but his usage was less than ever. For the first time in his career, Kaufman had less than 100 carries, and as he was never a great receiver out of the backfield, he didn't get much play in the passing game either. But even so, Oakland's offense was dangerous. Their defense was much improved. There was no question. These Raiders were for real. They won the division. Their 12 wins were their most in over a decade. Kaufman had missed the final 2 games of the year, but he wasn't going to miss his first playoff game. He carried the ball once in a divisional round win over Miami, then watched from the sideline as the Ravens ended Oakland's Super Bowl dreams, with Kaufman finishing year 6 with 499 rush yards on nearly 5.5 yards per carry, along with 13 catches for 127 yards and a score. So the Raiders were heading in the right direction, and Kaufman finally looked to be on the winning track in his career. But then in April, a 27-year-old Kaufman made an announcement. He was moving on from football. Many around the organization had seen it coming for years, with Kaufman's growing commitment to his faith. Football at one point meant a lot to Napoleon, but his faith fulfilled him in ways football never could.
I tell people all the time, for me, it was not a matter of reason, it was a matter of obedience. I knew this is what God had called me to do, and my life was his.
His later years with the Raiders had even seen him become the team chaplain and baptize a couple teammates at the facility. But now Kaufman fully committed to his faith, embarking on his new calling, founding his own congregation as an ordained minister, as well as spreading his football knowledge as a high school coach. He would even make a return to the Raiders as the team chaplain in 2013. But when the Raiders moved to Vegas, Kaufman stayed behind. Napoleon Kaufman was the definition of a dynamic player, a threat to score whenever he touched the ball. The big play was his forte, yet also his dependence. Not the most efficient when talking production, but the type of player that fans quickly grow to love. He will forever be one of the greatest players to don a Washington Huskies uniform. And while his Raiders career was brief and didn't lead to a lot of wins, he left fans with a lot of good memories in the form of long runs. Napoleon Kaufman may not have been on a Hall of Fame trajectory, but Oakland had seemed to finally be putting together a real contender when Kaufman stepped away. The situation seemed right, and you were left wondering what could have been. But Kaufman's heart was no longer in it, and he embarked on a journey which he found much bigger than football. But that's it for today's episode on Napoleon Kaufman. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on another great Huskies back, or this one on the player who replaced him in Oakland. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.